Call the meeting to order. I'm just amazed how you can quiet down a room. Have you got a special
My house
special
doesn't work
technique?
that way.
Okay. We'll call the meeting to order, and as everyone well knows by now, we're dealing with the statutory review of the Proceeds of Crime and the Terrorism Financing Act, which I think the Minister knows we've heard from a lot of witnesses, and we did a fair bit of international travel on this subject as well. And the last witness, at least for the moment, will be the Minister and others from the Department of Finance. So, Minister Murnau, Minister of Finance, welcome. And I will remind committee members that on this subject today, we're sticking to this subject and we're not going offline on other subjects. It is the Proceeds of Crime, Terrorism Financing Act, and that's where we're sticking. Mr. Minister, you have the floor, and with you is Annette Ryan, Associate Assistant Deputy Minister, Financial Sector Policy Branch. Welcome as well, Annette. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And with that introduction, I guess I'm happy I brought this speech and not another speech.
Yeah.
So thanks to all of you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today, to speak about the parliamentary review of the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Act. I want to start by thanking the committee for taking the time to review the administration and the operation of the Act. I know that the members of this committee take this issue very seriously, and I just want to reinforce that the government does as well. We appreciate, and I certainly can speak for myself, I appreciate the serious effort of the committee to study this complex issue, to listen to valuable contributions from a wide variety of witnesses, and to work on recommendations for the government to consider. Comme vous le savez, Monsieur le Président, le gouvernement...
As you know, Mr. Chair, the government has been working for 3 years on these investments in order to grow the Canadian economy, reinforce the middle class, and offer real opportunities for those who wish to join the middle class. We've also worked diligently to ensure that our tax regime be fair for all Canadians. In simple terms, the economy cannot function for everyone unless everyone pays their just part.
As Canadians, help to provide the services that we all rely on that give us a good quality of life. Taxes help us to build the infrastructure, getting our goods to market, infrastructure that helps to sustain good, well-paying jobs. Of course, the taxes we pay help to set broken bones and to push cancer into remission across the country. They help to pay for the programs and services for people who help to keep Canadians and Canadian communities safe. And so it's vitally important to all of us that everyone pays their fair share. That's why we're continuing to take steps to continue to fight tax evasion and tax avoidance. We recently tabled a motion to introduce legislation that would enact an international convention known as the Multilateral Instrument, or MLI, into Canadian law. The MLI is aimed at countering tax avoidance strategies that lead to base erosion and profit shifting, in which businesses and wealthy individuals use tax treaty loopholes to inappropriately shift profits to low tax or no tax locations to avoid paying taxes. This is an important tool for us in combating aggressive international tax avoidance. By making sure that everyone pays their fair share, we can continue to safeguard our ability to invest in the programs and services that we know that Canadians deserve. That's also why we're actively engaged in complementary efforts through the G20 aimed at combating international tax evasion and aggressive tax avoidance, including strengthening beneficial ownership transparency for corporations and trusts. We're also working with our international partners, both within the G7 and the wider international community, on a range of fronts to combat money laundering and related risks, including terrorist financing. This work includes legislative and regulatory amendments, risk assessments, evaluations, and contributions to international efforts through groups such as the Financial Action Task Force, or FATFA, the United Nations, the G7, G20, and the Counter-ISIL Finance Group. This past April, I had the opportunity to speak at the No Money for Terror conference convened by President Macron in Paris, where ministers from 70 countries came together to discuss the evolving and complex challenges that need to be met to cut off terrorists' access to funds. These efforts help to keep Canadians safe, and of course, we're proud to do our part. Also important to the government is making sure that the growth that we achieve works for everyone, not just for the most wealthy. This was a central theme of the recent G7 meetings and continues to be a priority going forward. Il est important de mentionner, Monsieur le Président,
Important to point out, Mr. Chairman, that growth that benefits everyone cannot be attained and cannot in isolation. Many factors have to be in place. We have to have democratic institutions, an open economy, and a financial system which is accessible and available and progressive. We have all these elements here in Canada.
Target for those seeking to launder proceeds of crime or raise, transfer, and use funds for terrorist purposes. To complicate matters even more, money laundering and the financing of terrorist activities are crimes that facilitate and reward the commission of other crimes, compromising the safety and security of our communities, and also compromising the affordability of our communities. We know that money laundering has the potential to cause distortionary effects in local housing markets, contributing to making some communities simply unaffordable for many Canadian families. We need to stop this. Canada's anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing regime should marshal every tool at its disposal to detect, stop, and to prosecute these illicit activities. Of course, we in Canada are not unique in this regard. Countries around the world are working hard to detect and deter financial crimes. We can learn a great deal from the efforts of others. I know that members of the committee have taken on this challenge, traveling to the United Kingdom and the United States, two of our Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance partners, to learn more about what's worked in those jurisdictions when it comes to cracking down on money laundering and terrorist financing. Here at home, I understand the committee has made time to hear from a broad range of Canadian witnesses who have a stake in ensuring that money laundering and terrorist financing are not perpetuated on their watch. This includes leaders from provincial governments, members of law enforcement, privacy and transparency experts, and those working in the private sector, representing financial institutions, legal and other professional associations, realtors, as well as other reporting entities. This sort of cooperation is important because money laundering and terrorist financing are often complex, and the techniques that are used are often very sophisticated. Those who finance crime and terrorism exploit the fact that these crimes know no borders. In many cases, these persons have been able to evade the attention of authorities, effectively protecting those who benefit from their illegal activities. Une intervention globale efficace doit être équilibrée.
A comprehensive and complete intervention has to be well balanced and well coordinated. This is where the Canadian regime, in the fight against the proceeds of crime and the financing of terrorist activities, comes into play. And depending on a number of very important tools that allow us to detect, to prevent, and to eliminate the laundering of money, this regime will protect the integrity of our financial system and ensure security for all Canadians.
International standards, but that doesn't mean that there isn't room for improvement. As a government, we're mindful of the need to protect the rights of Canadians and the need to respect the division of powers between the federal and provincial territorial governments, while also minimizing the burden on the private sector. We know there's a delicate balance to be achieved here. I encourage the committee to consult with those who can speak to how we can improve Canada's anti-money laundering regime while protecting the rights of Canadians. Our Privacy Commissioner, for example, would be a key person to consult on this issue. The unfortunate reality is that criminals are always finding new ways to exploit the financial system and use legitimate businesses for criminal purposes. We need to match their creativity with our resolve. Since the last review was completed in 2013, the environment in which money laundering and terrorist financing take place has evolved considerably. I know that 5 years seems like a short span of time, but we need to consider what's changed. There's been significant growth in complex financial products, including virtual currencies that provide anonymity to their users. There's also been broader adoption of emerging financial technologies like mobile banking, which are changing the way Canadians access the financial system. In recent years, we've seen the continued use of complex legal and corporate arrangements that may be used to conceal the proceeds of crime and the true ownership of companies. And there have also been improvements to digital identity recognition, which can help to better protect the identities of consumers. Monsieur le Président, il vaut la peine.
Mr. Chairman, it's worthwhile to remind that criminals count a lot and depend on partners to launder money and to process the proceeds of crime. In Canada, businesses also have a very significant role to play, and this is why awareness-raising activities, education, many of them brought forward by FINTRAC, are crucial. I know that the committee has heard speak of the importance of offering training and education, a user-friendly method, so that Canadian businesses and enterprise can better fulfill their responsibilities. I certainly hope that the committee will take these recommendations seriously and consider what we could do to further minimize the burden on business.
Government need to continue to work together to ensure that policy and operations are well integrated so that we can most effectively counter new threats as they emerge. We cannot effectively combat money laundering and terrorist financing without good collaboration between reporting entities, national security agencies, and federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal law enforcement. At the same time, while it's important to have quick and reliable exchanges of information between regime partners, it's also essential that collectively we respect the rights of Canadians, including their privacy rights, and the rights guaranteed to Canadians through the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Privacy and the protection of personal information is very important to the government. That's why reports required by the Act we're discussing today go to FINTRAC, not directly to law enforcement. Reports and other information submitted to FINTRAC, whether about suspicious financial transactions or about the cross-border flow of funds, are subject to independent review and analysis by the agency. Numerous checks and balances have been built into the regime, including those that ensure FINTRAC's independence and impartiality from law enforcement or national security investigations. I know that you've heard from the Privacy Commissioner and other witnesses who remind us that these checks and balances are there to protect the privacy rights of individual Canadians. I'm looking forward to all your recommendations, but in particular to your advice on how the regime can be more effective at combating money laundering and terrorist financing while reducing the burden on business and continuing to respect individual rights and freedoms of Canadians. As we consider our next steps, we also need to look for ways to close the legislative and regulatory gaps highlighted in 2016 in Canada's Mutual Evaluation Report by the Financial Action Task Force, in addition to the many issues raised by stakeholders and our regime partners. One such gap has to do with the collection of and access to beneficial ownership information on who truly owns corporations in Canada. As you know, the government's already working hard in collaboration with provinces and territories to improve the availability of beneficial ownership information. This is proof of the value of a collaborative approach when taking on complex problems. Another issue on reporting entities that has been identified relates to legal professions not being part of Canada's regime. We know that a recent legal decision from the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that some of the provisions of the Act relating to lawyers are unconstitutional. We understand that there are risks posed by having legal professionals not being part of Canada's anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing regime. In that regard, we're open to your suggestions on how to better integrate legal professionals into the regime in a way that's constructive and respects the court and its decisions. Both these gaps, the ones relating to beneficial ownership information and to legal professionals, are evident in the real estate sector, which is vulnerable to tax evasion and money laundering schemes, given the number of large financial transactions that take place in this market. At the federal level, both FINTRAC and the Canada Revenue Agency have increased their activities to improve compliance with anti-money laundering and tax obligations, but more needs to be done. As you know, there are other areas of emerging activity by money launderers and terrorist financiers, such as crypto assets and trade-based money laundering, that the government's also working to address. I look forward to hearing your advice on these issues. So, Mr. Chair, before I wrap up, I'd like to assure the committee that these concerns, money laundering and terrorist financing, are concerns that the government takes very seriously. To put it bluntly, these things are a threat to the safety and security of Canadians, and the government knows that keeping Canadians safe has to be a top priority. Je tiens à remercier encore une fois le comité pour le
I would like to thank the committee once again for the work that it's accomplished in order to maintain security and safety for Canadians. I am beholding to the attention you pay to these issues, and I hope to meet your receive your recommendations soon. In so doing, I will be very recognizant of the depth of this task. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today, and I'll be very glad to take your questions. Thank you.
Do 5-minute rounds to try and get everybody on. Mr. Fergus first.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, puis merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre, puis
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister and Ms. Ryan, for being here today. I'm inspired by your words this afternoon, Mr. Minister. Very frank, forward, and I appreciate that you wish to attack this problem. It's fairly rare, but I think there will be some unanimity among the membership of this committee to ensure that we will provide recommendations which might push the envelope somewhat. At least we hope so.
tool at our disposal to detect, stop, and prosecute proceeds of crime from money laundering and terrorism financing. There's room for improvement, you said, but you also pointed out quite correctly that there are some issues. The division of powers in our country in terms of the federal-provincial relationship, privacy concerns, we understand, the constitutional rights to protect solicitor-client privilege. We understand all that, but I must tell you, after seeing and listening to our, speaking with our witnesses, and after having an opportunity to see what's being done in other jurisdictions, United States, United Kingdom, I do think that there is a lot of room for improvement in terms of how we organize ourselves. One of the key aspects of it, Minister, and I'd love to get your initial thoughts on this, is transforming the relationship that FINTRAC has not only with the financial institutions who submit their suspicious transaction reports, but also in terms of dealing with law enforcement agencies or other government agencies and to transform that relationship rather than a one-way relationship, which seems to work. It's a direct relationship into FINTRAC and no opportunity for the financial institutions to get regular and more precise feedback. Actually no opportunity legally for financial institutions to have that a more detailed conversation among themselves as to any suspicious activities that they've identified. I'm just wondering where you would feel if about transforming FINTRAC more into a one-way relationship, into more of a dynamic dialogue within with financial institutions.
Well, let me start by acknowledging again, as you noted, that there's always more to do in this regard. This area is one where the bad guys are spending time and money to try and evade laws in our country and in countries around the world. So that it's heartening to hear that there's unanimity around this table for those efforts. We do need to remain vigilant. Around FINTRAC, what I would hope that the committee will come forward with is your reflections after having met with witnesses on potential areas for improvement. We need to be constantly considering how we're currently doing things and ensuring that we're having the impact we want while respecting the laws that of course protect Canadians. In the course of that consideration, we'll have to think first and foremost, obviously, about privacy laws and balancing the need for privacy versus the need for back and forth between institutions, if that were the case, or back and forth between FINTRAC and the institution. We also will need to consider the fact that the organization charged with Policing sometimes has a requirement that means that relationship needs to be governed in a particular way. So I don't have the answer. I'm anxious to hear your observations on how things can be improved and open-minded.
I'll do very quickly. Beneficial ownership registry and the negotiations with the provinces. What would be your best guess as to how quickly can we have a national registry, in terms of what's the best guess for having an agreement with the provinces between sharing information on beneficial ownership?
Well, this has been, and I think I have a very short period of time, this has been a very positive file. If someone else has a question, I'm happy to go on to more detail. We already have agreement.
Then I do, sorry.
Well, we already have agreement that we're working with provinces in this regard. The provinces have said that they will work with us to make sure that they do get beneficial ownership information available. And then the question, and I'll be anxious to hear the committee's report, is how we make sure that is a dynamic process that gets us the right information to satisfy our goals of ensuring that we don't have problematic behavior.
Thank you both. Mr. Albus.
Mr. Chair, Minister, you've recently made changes to the criminal code, not the Minister of Justice, in regards to the money laundering regime we have here in Canada. You've made it effectively where big corporations can get a get-out-of-jail card free for money laundering. Why do you think that makes Canadians safe?
Perhaps you can provide more detail on how you've come to this conclusion?
C-74, Division 20, you've made a change that includes a schedule in the criminal code that includes money laundering that gives effectively large corporations a get-out-of-jail card. Do you not remember your own legislation?
How is it that you see that this gives an organization a get-out-of-jail-free card is what I'm trying to understand.
A deferred prosecution agreement basically allows them to basically not actually have any consequences in a court of law for cases of proven found money laundering. Your legislation, Minister, how does that make Canadians safer?
Well, I think there may be a fundamental misunderstanding on your part of what we're trying to achieve here. We recognize that when organizations are found to be offside with laws, that they should be held to account, and they should be held to account for their actions in a way that ensures that we protect Canadians. That is what we're trying to achieve. We want to make sure that as we do that we have a method to do that gets those organizations to pay the price of their criminality or their bad behavior, and it doesn't in any way negatively impact their employees or other unwitting people that happen to work in those organizations. So by moving forward with a deferred prosecution agreement approach, an approach taken, of course, as you probably know, by other countries, including the United States and the United Kingdom as two good examples, we think is a prudent way to ensure that we have companies pay the price for any wrongdoing in a way that allows us to ensure that our economy continues to be successful and that the people who are legitimately responsible for the bad behavior pay a price, as opposed to people that aren't, people that are unwittingly employed by firms that have had that bad behavior.
By not allowing this legislation to be studied by the Justice Committee, and actually the amendment was made at clause by clause, Minister, we didn't actually get to see what the justification from your government on that. So I'm very disappointed that you just simply can't explain exactly why this makes Canadians safer. However, I am going to go back to the line of questioning on beneficial ownership. You are working with the provinces. That's good, to create a registry. Obviously, both provincial and the federal government would have access to that. Does that include the CRA?
Mr. Minister, if you wanted to complete your other answer first, I don't think you quite completed it. Completed, yes, you get time, and then go to this one.
I'm fine with just responding to this approach.
So the registry,
Go ahead.
if I may, Minister. The registry does not yet exist. The agreement among ministers would have corporations hold beneficial ownership as per changes to federal and provincial territorial corporate statutes, and we will continue the discussions in terms of the merits of different types of registries.
Such a registry the data be made available or the information be made available to CRA? It's a very simple question.
Well, I think as you just heard, that that's not currently something that's happened. We are going to continue our discussions with the provinces to make sure that the information is available in the way that will allow us to actually have the desired impact.
You're talking about dealing with tax evasion, Minister. You're talking about being able to deal with these things. It's a pretty simple question. Why would you have a federal registry for beneficial ownership if it wasn't available to the CRA?
Well, I don't think we want to get ahead of ourselves. Clearly,
Okay.
Being collaborative with provinces means that we actually have to work with them to get to the
Well,
conclusions.
we already collect taxes from many provinces, but we'll just keep going on.
Let the minister finish his answer first.
Well,
Go ahead. No, you'll have time.
The background to this this decision is obviously to make sure that we have the kind of information we require in order to effectively govern our laws, and so
Okay.
that means governing our tax laws, which means the CRA is likely to be involved. However, we want to do this in collaboration with provinces and get to the answer appropriately.
Okay. Well, again, Minister, I'd also like you to keep in mind that not only would CRA have that access so that they can deal with some of the tax evasion that you're dealing with here, and provinces obviously want to work on that, but also I think it would help with our regime here in Ottawa. Obviously, we all submit to the Ethics Commissioner information about our assets and whatnot, and you find it easier for public office holders to let the Ethics Commissioner know all of their assets so that nothing is overlooked. So I would hope you would consider that for future public office holders.
No response? No further response there, Minister?
No, I don't think there was a question.
Mr. Dussault.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Monsieur le Ministre, pour
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for your appearance. I'd like to continue on this issue of beneficial ownership and the discussion that you had with the provinces. Apparently, some agreement was reached about access to information in enterprises. Have you, or are you discussing currently various measures to be implemented in future, perhaps? And have the discussions around the federal table been such that this registry might in fact be made public or public to the accessible to the public? Is this going to be a public register or not? As you well know, we are currently working with the provinces to ensure that we have the necessary information, first of all. That's the first objective. I began almost 2.5 years ago in discussing with the provinces in search of a solution. And I think approximately 7% of corporations have a federal charter. Others are provincially incorporated. So this is why it's important to work with the provinces. It's necessary, absolutely, to work with them. To present, we haven't yet quite decided on how it will evolve. We know that some believe that the registry and the registration should be public. Others believe that it's quite possible to attain our objectives of improving the situation with something that's slightly different than what is in vogue in other countries. So we're discussing the options with the provinces. Well, in your discussions with the provinces, you're there just to listen, or you're not propose? I'm there to listen to what they have to say. I'm here also to hear what you have to say with your recommendations and suggestions, and the negotiations continue. So we find an appropriate solution. Linked to this question, then. Structures are becoming more and more, corporate structures are becoming more and more complex. They've become overlaced with other corporations throughout the world. Very complex ties and relationships. What leads you to believe that the registry would report the beneficial ownership across international borders? We can do anything we want within Canadian territory, but if the structures are such that multilateral or multinational countries don't fall under the aegis of beneficial ownership rules, it's all for naught. And because if someone is dishonest, they'll find a corporate structure that will, in fact, accommodate their activities. So how do you deal with this in order to ensure that more countries join the regime so that, the dishonest may not, in fact, hide? Well, it's very difficult, of course, to find a way to ensure complete mastery of the situation. We are working with other countries, OECD countries for the most part, to ensure that we arrive at agreements that will in fact improve the situation. There's two important events that have occurred over the last few years. We've signed the Common Reporting Standards so that we can exchange information with other countries. And we've also signed an agreement for the base erosion and profit shifting so that companies don't find a way of playing one jurisdiction against another and put profits in a low tax country. Would you like to add something? No, I think you covered the ground fully well, Mr. Minister. We're also working with our partners who are working to avoid money laundering to ensure that this situation is promoted everywhere. Well, this also arises from questions to witnesses. It seems that in your discussion, or in your discussion paper, or your the book, what you produced in 2018, nowhere is there mention made of the risks to securities. In Canada, perhaps, well, it wasn't mentioned by the Ministry of Finance, and it wasn't talked about or presented by any of our witnesses. Would you like to adjust your aim a bit and see if you recognize this kind of security for money laundering? Well, it's very important for us to get your report so that we can take a look at the challenges, the issues, perhaps a comparison of what happens in other countries to gauge those risks for future. We're here to listen to what you have to say.
Both, and we did hear a lot on securities when we were in our travels, so I expect there likely will be something in that. Mr. Sabara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome this afternoon, Minister. We've probably heard over from 100 witnesses here on this study that we've been doing, and a number of agencies come in, and I'd have to say this, that on our travels to New York and Toronto and those who traveled to London, the feedback was definitely that listening to and hearing from the agencies outside of our wonderful country and the granularity that they provided was a real positive thing for us. The information, the granularity it was provided from, whether it was FinCEN or Department of Justice or Treasury or the New York State Attorney General's office, was very welcome, and I think will make our report even better. Sometimes I wish we received that sort of granularity from our own agencies. But nonetheless, we have heard from a lot of people and a lot of folks. The one question I have is the article in the Hill Times that came out, Feds Float Idea, Beneficial Ownership, Registries, House Finance Committee Reviews, Anti-Money Law. Part of that article stated that Canada was viewed as behind on corporate transparency. And through your leadership in sitting down with the provinces in December of 2017, we came to an agreement to strengthen beneficial ownership transparency through BIPs. So my question, Minister, is how are we doing in Canada, and what measures are we undertaking to take the veil off that view that Canada is behind on corporate transparency?
Well, I think we should start by acknowledging that our structure for corporate registrations in Canada presents particular challenges. The fact that we have registration provincially and federally, and that we have those registrations across the country, does mean that we've got an important challenge that we need to overcome. It would certainly all else being equal, would be easier if we had one approach to registration, but that's not the reality that we face. So as we contend with, and I didn't see the article that you're referring to, with people's assertions that we're not doing as much as we should do, we need to recognize that that there's more to be done here. That we do need to get this information, and that's the only way for us to deal with some of these challenges. That is exactly why we've been focused on this from the beginning. I will say that the provinces have not been reluctant. We have, obviously 10 provinces and 3 territories, and it's not always easy to get agreement on everything, but we've had agreement on this. But different provinces have different ability to be speedy in doing their work, so it can't always happen quite as quickly as we might like. We're going to stay on top of it. I think our view is that getting the information, making sure that information is accessible to the appropriate authorities at the time they need it, is critically important. And we've made progress, but we're not there yet, and we're going to keep on it.
And the issue of beneficial ownership obviously came up a number of times within the confines of the study, and it's also an issue in the United States. They're having to deal with it. They have the same issue that we have. For example, someone can buy a condo in New York City for $100 million, and no one knows who the condo purchaser is, where the funds were received from. You can use the example here in Canada, where potentially someone buys a house in West Vancouver or in Toronto and pays several $1 million for it, puts it in a corporation or a trust, and you will never know who the purchaser is and or where the funds are received. And I think the December agreement is a big first step in getting to some sort of registry, and you can quiver on the details, public, private, and so forth. And I love that. I love to hear with regards to the December agreement on bullet point 3. There was a date of July 1st, 2019. To put forward these legislative amendments in order to bring these changes into force by July 1st, 2019, regarding to a number of statutes on beneficial owners transparency. Is there any sort of update from that point 3 on the December agreement?
So the work with provincial and territorial partners is very much on track. We've worked through the technical details, done targeted consultations, and we'll bring it to ministers next week at your meeting.
Okay, Mr. O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister. Nice to see you at the committee. My question is going to relate to the No Money for Terror conference. I guess you were there alongside most of the other G7, G20 finance ministers.
Yes.
Were you a signatory to the joint declaration that came out of the conference?
Yeah, to my recollection, there was not a signed document coming out of that conference.
Or joint statement. I might be overstating it. The reason I ask is the first element coming out of that conference was a priority, and I'll read it to you. Further reinforcing the domestic, legal, and operational frameworks to collect, analyze, and share information by national authorities. But this week, Bill C-59 passed, and we've actually taken away that information sharing ability for relevant national security information with changes to the Security of Canada Information Act. So we don't seem to be meeting the lofty goals of the conference in terms of terror financing.
We will continue to work to ensure that we get the information required for the work that we're trying to achieve. And what I can tell you is that'll be a continuing focus of our government. We see that there's some very important steps that need to be taken right now. And I think appropriately, we've been talking about one that we think is critically important, which is beneficial ownership, which, as was pointed out, is quite murky.
You know, we're looking at a situation we heard in London where banks and financial institutions share information amongst one another, and through a GIMLET and other sources with the public sector. In Canada, we're actually taking away the ability for public authorities to share the same information when it comes to terror financing, money laundering. Why would we trust the financial institutions sharing amongst each other and not trust departments of the federal government? Let me say, you're aware that the Canadian banks are asking for this information sharing ability in Canada.
Sorry, I missed your point.
We've heard that our partners, the other countries that were at the French conference No Money for Terror, are enhancing their information sharing between government departments. Bill C-59, which passed this week, detracts from relevant information sharing. So why are we going in an opposite direction to our allies and partners in the G20?
Well, as I'm sure you can appreciate, we have all of us, the countries that were in that meeting, different approaches to ensuring that we have appropriate data flow in our countries. In our country, we think that FINTRAC is an important institution that allows for the passage of information from our financial institutions to the federal government. And we will always seek to balance the important safeguards around Canadians' privacy with the importance of getting this information. So that will be a continuing focus.
Because one of the things security experts say is the siloing of information often leads to money laundering or terror financing existing. We see the global community and potentially from this hearing financial sharing between institutions, but we don't seem to trust agencies of our own government. Is there some reason why you removed that ability in Bill C-59?
As I've said, we believe that the approach that we've taken is one that allows us to get the information and that allows us to also ensure that we protect Canadians' privacy. It's always going to be a fine balance.
In your introduction, you had very fiery language. Greg quoted it: "Marshal every tool at our disposal." Yeah. You're actually taking away a tool that agencies within the federal government needed to use to stop terrorism financing. So how is that marshaling tools by taking tools away?
We'll be happy to get the committee's recommendations and ideas on how we can, at the same time, consider how we ensure that we are able to combat money laundering, terrorist financing, while protecting Canadians' financial information. The approach we're going to take, which I think all of us as parliamentarians appreciate, is to balance those two important issues.
We'll have to end it there, Ms. O'Connell.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Minister, for being here. And so, in fact, we actually heard, following up on Mr. O'Toole's point, we actually heard the opposite point being made by our own officials, is that funding for this level of departmental investigation was actually cut under the previous government and is only now being restored with new funding. So I find it quite interesting, the sudden concern over siloing, when it was specifically the previous government who cut the department that led to these types of investigations. And that's some testimony that I'm sure will be included in the report, and I'm sure a recommendation will be coming that will talk about the reinvestment after the previous government's lack of commitment to dealing with money laundering and anti-terrorism financing. So in terms of some of the things we've heard, I guess I don't have so much as specific questions, because this committee still has work to do in terms of formulating our recommendations. But in terms of some of the things we heard, one of the areas that was somewhat concerning to me was, and it was brought up by Mr. Fergus earlier, was actually the information sharing between banks, or the information of FINTRAC and the kind of the flow through process. And in the U.S., FinCEN seemed to have a very interesting program where any law enforcement agency in certain, for example, prosecutions in certain states could access it. And one of the benefits of this was there seemed to be a real sense of value in that information. What my concern is in some of the information sharing between banks is that banks aren't technically allowed to do that right now, but the enforcement side is a very small community, and they're sharing that information anyways amongst colleagues kind of informally. And the worry that I have, and I think we have to have this conversation, is banks taking the approach of de-risking. They're so afraid of regulation or penalties that they would rather just amongst themselves maybe de-risk some or debank some clients. And in this country, do we need to have that conversation around, are people entitled to a bank account? Are people have a right to have this? And that banks being so afraid of penalty that they just debank someone, and a Canadian who's done nothing wrong now has no access to a bank account. So I guess this is an area that I think we need to have some thinking around in terms of quality reporting from banks, so that, yes, they should be afraid of penalties, but not so afraid that they just get people out of the system that have actually never done anything wrong, but they amongst themselves through informal channels are deciding just it's not worth the risk and let's just debank some individuals. So I don't know if this is a discussion that you've had, but it was an area that I think we have to do some serious thinking around. Do you have any initial thoughts or not? I can go to another area as well.
I think you point out an issue that we'll be happy to hear from the committee on. Obviously, there's everything that we consider if we are focusing on getting information. If we're focusing on curbing bad behavior, there are consequences, and I think we need to carefully consider our objectives and the consequences.
Thank you. So in regards to Canada's international reputation, we did hear a different level of discourse than we heard from witnesses here, which is interesting, from our own agency officials. There's no question that I think our officials are doing a good job and our systems are working, but I think the issue of money laundering and terrorism financing has certainly changed, which you pointed out, and that there is a lot of work to be done, and that I worry that Canada's reputation might be that, and growing, that this is a good place to money launder. And we're seeing correlations, and this is what we heard from testimony, that where money launderers are, then come the human traffickers, then come the drug runners, because the money launderers don't care who they're laundering for. And that seems to be the client base. So I guess from this committee's perspective, the significant or the changes and the investments that will be made to move our system into, I think, where a lot of other countries are, is that commitment there amongst your department as well as public safety? Because I think that's an area that we saw certainly in the US and the UK, that it's a joint program between their equivalent of finance and their equivalent of public safety. Have you given any thought to maybe bringing them into the fold, not just as a kind of committee discussion basis, but as a overseer policy kind of formation process moving forward for any reviews?
We do think that in this area, working together with different areas of government is critically important. We already have the Department of Public Safety engaged in our efforts and how we can make sure that we're getting the appropriate information. We're not moving forward just in the area that you're talking about here. We're also recognizing that some of the other key areas of risk, cybersecurity being a very obvious one, which relates to this issue because how information can flow is critically important, and that's, I guess, demonstrated in terms of our focus on this issue through the kind of funding we put towards that this year, funding that was very well received by the banking community, and something that we've been looking at together with the banking community over the last number of years.
Well, I'd end it there, Mr. Kelly.
The director of FinTrack, when appearing at the committee, talked about the administrative burden of FinTrack and her stated goal of reducing the administrative burden of compliance. Do you support the director in that?
I do think that we constantly have to be thinking not only about our objective in terms of ensuring we have the information and the goal of trying to make sure that businesses aren't inappropriately burdened with administrative complexity.
We've heard that compliance is a huge burden on industries and various industries, including real estate, which you identified in your opening remarks. We've also heard that some of the reporting requirements seem arbitrary and not that don't actually target suspicious activity, just merely activity that meets a threshold. Do you support addressing this issue and ensuring that we actually target suspicious behavior rather than just meeting threshold targets?
I think it'll be important for us to hear back from the committee. So if the committee has observations on the kind of information that's being currently asked for and the approach to doing that, we'll be pleased to take those thoughts into consideration.
Okay. In your response to Mr. Albus's question, I want to make sure I understood you correctly. So you support the goal of establishing a beneficial ownership registry. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, I've made clear really over a period of years that we need to have the understanding of the beneficial owners of corporations and trusts in our country.
Or publicly accessible, or if not publicly, then by whom?
This is an area where we are, as I said, working with the provinces to make sure the information is available. And ensuring that information is available is the first step. Obviously, having this information is what will enable us to.
We'll have it though. What would be your recommendation of the type of registry that's established, publicly accessible or not?
We'll continue to work with the provinces to get to a conclusion that will be able to be engineered for the entire country. And again, I'd be happy to hear from the committee on your ideas based on the insights you've gained from your witnesses.
Opportunity for your own input now. You can tell us what you prefer.
Yeah, and I will have continuing opportunity for input, as you can imagine.
All right. So the CRA would have access to this registry?
We clearly are seeking to make sure that we have information on organizations so that we can ensure that they're compliant with our tax laws. So that is obviously the intent.
The Ethics Commissioner.
If you have recommendations for us in terms of the information and where you think it should be accessible, we're happy to listen to that. We'll always have to balance the issue of privacy against the issue of the accessibility of that information and the reasons for the information.
Any thoughts on where the balance between privacy and the public interest might lie with politically at-risk people like parliamentarians?
As a parliamentarian, I'm sure you have a point of view on this, and we'd be happy to hear your point of view.
Right. How much time have we got left?
Got about a minute.
All right. Well, Dan, I think, has a question.
Yes. Thank you again, Mr. Chair, Mr. Kelly. Minister, you added the common reporting standards onto credit unions, and they're complying. But when I talk to many credit unions, they find that the FinTrack, because they were added in terms of compliance, has been very burdensome. Now, you appointed the new director for FinTrack. She's come to this committee and she has said that she's going to work on this. Are you going to help support her in order to make the regime better and less burdensome on these small credit unions? Oftentimes, they are the only financial institution in rural areas.
I think right up to the Prime Minister, you've heard us say that we think better is always possible. So to the extent we can improve a situation, we will certainly try and do that.
Yeah, but I mean in better and not in adding more. So we're talking about a good review and looking less. And she has said that publicly. You appointed her through the Governor and Council. Your recommendation, are you going to work with her on that?
I understood the question the first time. And yes, I can confirm that we are going to try to continually improve.
Okay, Mr. Greywell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for coming here today. For a lot of
Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For a lot of Canadians sitting at home, obviously, they're playing by the rules. They're working hard, and they want to ensure that everybody plays by the rules and is working hard. We've obviously seen that there's a negative impact on our economy from money laundering. I think for a lot of people, though, they don't understand the sophistication behind money laundering. And most people just open a bank account and do their transactions without having any fear that their information will be shared with FINTRAC. Can you kind of walk through in a very simple terms how something would be tracked by a financial institution, passed to FINTRAC, and then at what threshold it might be passed on to the authorities?
To the extent you'd like a detailed walkthrough, I think I'll ask Annette.
Not a detail, just a high level, so that most Canadians could understand how this legislation even works in the first place.
At a very high level, clearly what we're trying to do is to make sure that suspicious activity is considered so that we don't allow that activity to move forward if it's going to result in potential, as we're talking about here, money laundering or terrorist financing. As we know, it's not easy to get to these conclusions. One important threshold we've chosen is the $10,000 threshold in terms of activities over $10,000. What I know to be the case is that's an important threshold, but it's not the only thing we need to consider because there are certainly activities that have gone on around the world in terrorist financing that have been funded through sources that were under $10,000 or multiple sources that came together. So it can't be the only threshold. We do need to think in a not only in a purely objective way, but also with some level of subjectivity, how we can ensure that we get to conclusions that protect Canadians. We're trying to work to get to that balance. And I think at a high level, what I'd want Canadians to know is that we see this as an area where we have to have continued vigilance, that we can put in thresholds that allow us to review activities that go on outside those thresholds, but we will need to continually think about how we update our rules, considering their privacy at the same time, because we don't want to inappropriately capture people who are just leading their life normally. To protect us, and these threats are real. We've seen in countries around the world, and we should not think that we're immune from the potential of bad actors that might be seeking to disrupt our way of life.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to cede the rest of my time.
Go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Banks have a long history in fighting against the laundering of money. The first objective, of course, of the banking sector is to contribute to the prevention, the detection of all criminal and suspect or terrorist activities, all the while protecting the privacy of our honest citizens. How does the government see this communication of information with the required partners and yet protect the privacy of Canadians? Well, that is, in fact, the objective. It's always necessary to, if we have to make changes to the rules, always necessary to consider the balance. We have to ensure that people are protected and that their personal information is protected. So your recommendations, your advice will be very, very important. You've had the opportunity to discuss with over 100 experts, I'm sure. And we are anxious to hear what you have to say to assist us in improving the situation. Thank you, Mr. Minister.
Questions, just a couple of points that maybe, and we'll get to officials in a sec, but maybe your officials want to consider that we did hear on the road, and we heard here as well. Simplifying compliance was a big one, and one of the witnesses we heard in New York talked about having a user-friendly reporting system with just a drop-down menu and a checkbox. Those are some things that need to be thought about. we did hear a lot about securities, and we heard in the U.S. that from them in their meetings with our folks in Canada that our folks don't take the securities issue serious enough in terms of money laundering. So that'd be a second. Trade transparency was a third, in which the documentations when something's imported into a country and exported, there's different documentation. The numbers don't match. Geographic targeting is used a fair bit in the U.S. and it led to some big findings. I think both sides mentioned trusts and layers of trusts. The last one was beyond what's already been said. Sharing of information is crucial, especially even among banks. That somebody who's doing not above board work is shut off by one bank, just moves down the street to another. There has to be a way of finding that information somehow, and then you have to balance all that against privacy. So those are just some other thoughts that weren't mentioned by committee members that we certainly heard on the road. With that, Mr. Minister, I know you're on a tight time schedule, and we're a little over that. Thank you very much for your presentation, and we'll take a 1-minute break and bring the rest of the officials up. So thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So if official Beaupre and our Miss Beaupre, I guess, I'm not sure. Mr. Beaupre and Mr. Wright could come up. And we only have 19 minutes at the most. Sarah, can you grab me a coffee? Mr. Dussault, do you want to start?
Yes, of course.
Okay. I'm surprised at that, but yeah, go ahead. And we'll go to 3-minute rounds if we could, so people can get on.
Oui, je suis juste encore un peu surpris par.
Well, I'm still a little bit surprised by the answer of the Minister on Beneficial Ownership. He's met provincial finance ministers, but he doesn't seem to still have a set position as a federal Minister of Finance on this issue. In the various discussions that are still underway, apparently the minister, the federal minister, is not pushing any particular position. What's up with that? I'll answer in English if I might.
Minister's comments as being respectful of the dialogue that he continues to have with provincial and territorial counterparts that go towards essentially a very timely progress on this issue. So the first step that was the basis of the December agreement of last year would put in place the legal, if you will, specifications that give us the real granularity that let us have that discussion of what would it take to create a registry. If you think about the concept as being an IT project that could span federal plus provincial plus territorial jurisdictions, that aspect of proceeding in a way that lets people all agree on what we're talking about in terms of what information do we mean, to harmonize and standardize that to the extent possible, and then have a discussion about how you could collect it and who should have access to what types of information, is a logical way to proceed. And I would point to the leadership that he's brought to that discussion as having gotten us that first step, and we continue towards it.
Je comprends. Sinon, sur un autre sujet que j'ai pas eu le temps d'aborder tantôt.
On another issue I hadn't had the chance to approach the minister on, it's cyber currencies, virtual currencies. A certain risk factor has been identified by the department on that. How is it that nothing has been done so far on that? We've heard that in certain countries there's been some controls or regulations made of the exchange transactions of cryptocurrencies as opposed to fiat money. So why hasn't Canada done anything to control that or regulate it in any way?
To the committee that the government has taken an important step in this space. On June 9th, we pre-published comprehensive regulations that target exactly this issue. So the regulations that are now before the Canadian public for consultation would essentially do just that. They would specify that dealers in virtual currency, which are now defined for first time in Canada in legal detail, would be treated in essentially a parallel way as other money service businesses. To respond to specific elements of your question, this would govern the point of exchange from cryptocurrencies into fiat currency, and also exchanges in the crypto to crypto space, which I know you've been taking testimony from many witnesses.
Oh, Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you very much, and thank you. It might be helpful if that can be passed on to the clerk so we have it specifically for all members. I wanted to ask just maybe more of a technical question. One of the areas, and it was alluded to, the specific, so here we have the STRs with FINTRAC. FinCEN has SARS, and there was significant testimony that we heard in the U.S. From various stakeholders that appreciated how much easier the SARS in the U.S. were, how much more effective they were. We actually had testimony from someone who reports both in the U.S. and in Canada, and specifically knows both systems. So from a technical standpoint, has the department looked at the SARS in the U.S. and been looking at making some technical changes as to the types of forms we have, the user-friendly versions, as well as the fact that if individuals at these institutions or who should be reporting don't understand how to report, are we worried that they're spending more time? We had testimony that the individual would, every time he had to fill out an STR for Canada, he had to refer back to pages and pages of a manual of how to do it, versus his SARS in the U.S. took 15 minutes.
Sure. So this is a very important question, and I'm glad to have a chance to speak to it today. The way that the U.S. is able to simplify that initial reporting for SARS and then subsequently allow their authorities to go back to banks is really effective, and it is good in terms of reducing burden. It is different than in Canada because of the way that our Charter of Rights and Freedoms is structured. So specifically, Section 7 and Section 8 of the Charter are really quite pertinent here. And it speaks to search and seizure and, and sort of the rights of Canadians to how their information could or should not be used, in prosecuting them. And so that's something that prevents us from being quite like the U.S. Can we do better in that space? We have a range of discussions underway right now with Canadian financial institutions as well as different parts of the academic world in this space. So the Royal United Services Institute in the UK has been working with us and the private sector to look at best practices from other countries that would align with our charter. So we're very much seized with that, and we look forward to thoughts and advice from the committee. You raised two other points. One is the user friendliness of how we can take in information from any number of private sector entities that align with their IT systems. I believe you heard from the director of FinTrack to say that's something that we understand, and that goes to just doing a range of work to be able to take in that information in the way that aligns with businesses. And then the third point in terms of better communicating with businesses as to what the requirements are, how, why, et cetera, also very much within the objective set of our FinTrack colleagues.
Okay, and Mr. Albus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank each one of you for the work you do every day and appreciate your expertise at the committee. Now, obviously, your department has published a paper in regards to our work, which has been very helpful. And I do know that obviously you have to work with the government if there's going to be any legislative changes. So I'm not going to ask you at this point about any of those. But right now, Canadians are under the obligations, for example, sanctions. If someone is of a group or if a person has been named under our economic sanctions and a financial institute or someone that is under the anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism funding regime works with them, that they could be punishable under a variety of different statutes. So also the same, obviously, with just the anti-terrorism compliance. One of the challenges we've heard, and these are the current rules as they are, one of the challenges we've heard is there's no consolidated list. Foreign Affairs, or Global Affairs, pardon me, handles some of the sanctions. You handle some other ones. Is there not an ability with your department to work productively within current laws to make this easier so that those people that are working in this industry every day can quickly and accurately check to see the people that they're dealing with are not going to get them into trouble?
That's a very important question, and one that the government recently provided important new resources to Global Affairs Canada, who lead on sanctions, to establish the right teams and experts and so on that will do essentially that will support the sanctions regime in a much more practical, tangible, concrete way with the right information conveyed in the right way that will have exactly that objective.
The C-59 raised by Mr. O'Toole, where there are more hurdles now for departments to be able to share information, does that actually work against that ability to have a consolidated list?
So that is not a bill that we led on. I think, Ian, you have a greater touch point with that.
Okay. So C-59 was, SCISA, its ability to share information. I think obviously you have to talk to public safety, who are the lead for that piece of legislation. But our understanding is that it really, the changes did limit. I think it pulled one agency off, but really did not impact, certainly didn't impact FinTrack, nor our ability to use SCISA to exchange information. I think, the question here on sanctions is that's more public information anyway. It's a listing that will come out through due process, and we'd have to talk to our Global Affairs colleagues, but I don't think we see that it would be a SCISA type of a national security threat type of an issue.
Yeah, I would certainly hope so. I appreciate your listening.
Thank
Oh,
you.
that's it?
That's it. 3 minutes goes fast. You never know, we might get around to you again. Mr. Sabara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to keep it quick. Quick question. How can we ensure that when FinTrack is dealing with some of our smaller institutions, credit unions, namely, that we're not overburdening smaller financial institutions with just compliance for the sake of compliance?
So that's a great question. I think it goes to the efforts that the FinTrack officials spoke to make sure that both the communication to institutions as well as the means by which they receive information are commensurate. It does go to an important objective, however, which is that we not leave essentially blind spots in our overall regime that would then become the target for money launderers to exploit. So, again, that word of balance comes up, and that's what we're seeking.
One of the really good things that we heard on our visit to New York City, and specifically with FinCEN, was this idea of a GTO, geographic targeting, which they utilize. Do we have a similar type program? It seems to have been very effective on their part. They seem to have a lot more tools at their disposal, if I can use that. And please correct me if I'm wrong, please. But on the GTO, what is it? Do we have a similar program to that? If we do, any details? If we don't, why don't we?
So, again, I think your question touches on almost the answer. The Americans don't have as many tools in the real estate sector as we necessarily do. And so they use the geographic targeting orders as almost a complement to some of the areas where they don't have the tools that we do. That said, we are interested in it as a policy tool, which we don't currently have within the regime. And it goes to the question of whether we can practically target attention to areas where we think there might be more risk than others. And we explore that to a certain extent in our paper and look forward to the committee's thoughts.
Yeah, thank you.
Both Mr. Dussault and then Mr. Graywell.
Rapidement, avec le temps qui nous reste.
Very quickly then, I'd like to come back on the question that was raised a bit earlier on the, well, I don't know, debanking, I suppose we could say. We've heard that in the United States, there was a possibility for the authorities to maintain that some accounts remain open, and so that there's some kind of compensation or indemnity to the bank if they're holding suspect bank accounts. I was wondering if we were doing the same thing in Canada. What's the Canadian position? Is that something that the committee should look at more closely to try to elucidate it further?
I would say that it isn't the same regime in Canada. However, it is a similar set of objectives and pressures. First of all, on the question of debanking individuals, there is an important question within that. There's essentially two important questions. One is the social aspect of not having people removed from access to banking for any number of social reasons. There's also the security aspect of not pushing people essentially into the shadows, and to the extent that they move further away from the formal banking system, then that brings its own set of risks. And we very much want to get that balance right and avoid debanking people who absolutely should have access to the banking system. Part of that goes to being ever more specific and rigorous in terms of what constitutes suspicious transactions and that burden of proof. So yes, very much so on that margin. In terms of the second portion of your question, in which speaks to how we can work with the different institutions on this. I think that's. I'll turn to Maxime on that one.
They'll get switched. Don't worry about it.
C'est effectivement un enjeu qu'on a déjà entendu.
Yes, it's an issue that an issue that concerns us, concerns expressed by the financial institutions and by law enforcement agencies as well. So on the basis of any testimony that you've heard, if you have any advice to provide us, we'd be quite open to hear what you have. Obviously, there's quite a few challenges here. Restitution, or banks have to meet their obligations. And if they suspect suspicious activities on an account, they have to respond, particularly in the face of a request from a law enforcement agency of some sort. Now, we're open to anything you may have to suggest on that. Well, we were told that perhaps a letter would be sent to the bank indicating keep this bank account open and we'll protect you in case that there's any liability issues. Nothing similar here, not to my knowledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, the officials. I just want to know, would there be a scenario in terms of a financial institution providing a suspicious transaction, or the fact that they think it's a suspicious transaction, to FINTRAC, and then FINTRAC launches an investigation, and the individual account holder never knowing that this is taking place?
So, one point that's important to keep in mind is that FINTRAC doesn't have investigative powers. So they do have a requirement to monitor the overall system of transactions for suspicious transactions. When there is a sufficient standard of concern that's been met, they do pass that information to the law enforcement or tax authorities or other competent authorities, who then follow the standard procedures of investigation in Canada. And just as it would be if a neighbor saw suspicious activity and reported it to the RCMP or other police, then all of the rights and protections that come into play do come into play in a very similar way.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to, just on the notion you raised, whether the individual knowing whether you use the term investigation, as Ms. Ryan pointed out, like if FINTRAC doesn't do investigations. However, there might be investigations down the line if FINTRAC reaches a threshold and discloses information to law enforcement. For that reason, there's actually a prohibition in the, I can't recall if it's in the Act or in the regulations. It's called a no tipping off. Basically, financial institutions have to be careful not to tip off a person that they are filing a suspicious transaction report, because down the line it could lead to an investigation. So by construct, it is quite possible that the client will not know that they're doing something that may be illegal or not, but that may look suspicious to the bank, and the bank will provide this information to FINTRAC.
Okay, we will have to stop there. Seeing as this is the last meeting of the Finance Committee in the immediate future, at least, thank you to the witnesses. But on behalf of the committee, certainly want to thank the clerk, the analysts, the interpreters, the Hill staff who make these committees function. Certainly the staff of all the parties who try and keep their members on their toes, and who work, definitely staff around here work long hours to help us out, and certainly to members, thank you for over the last several months for your work, and have a good, I hope you have the good opportunity to spend some time with your families. So with that, meeting adjourned.